Okay, so today what I want to look at is just sharing some information. I had to migrate my Nextcloud um, over to a new system. Uh, Being that the original system was pretty long in the tooth, it was very old. There was no way to just like pop out the hard drive and put it into the new system, which is now acting as my new quote unquote server. Um, Having done that, uh, what I needed to do was reinstall and essentially rebuild the Nextcloud. But I needed to do that while keeping the data intact. I didn't want to actually lose any of the data. There's two key components in Nextcloud. One is the actual data and files. All of that resides in the cloud instance. But then also critical is the database. Now, databases are not something where you can just migrate the files. There could be other things which need to be looked at, need to be resolved um, when you're actually running the Nextcloud instance. Um, and you need to make sure that when you take the data out of the database, it's data that is at rest, so to speak. Databases will do lots of things like store files or store data in memory. So while you may think you have a backup of all the raw files, it's also good to do a what's called a MySQL dump. So I'm going to do a demonstration of that, and then also talk about a few gotchas when it comes to Nextcloud itself, particularly if you're restoring from a Docker-based instance as I am. So for this, what we're going to do is going to look at the command line. So we got this command prompt here. Now this is logged into my Nextcloud instance. What you'll see here at the top when we do this ls, maybe you can zoom in a bit more, is this is the raw directory of the containers that are running. It's running the Docker Compose that I created. So if anyone has any questions about that, you can feel free to look to my previous video and also link in the subsequent blog post. In terms of the file structure, we can actually look at this Docker Compose. So the way everything is mounted, and again, it's on an internal network, so no real privacy concerns. But here we are with like the passwords and everything, and you can set like whatever password you want. You have the volumes. So this is the volumes that we're seeing here. This data is the Nextcloud environment data. So we're in this directory of the username. Nextcloud is the directory name, and then under this directory data, and that's mapping to the root directory that Nextcloud uses, which is essentially for their container and Apache web server directory. And then we also have the varlib MySQL, which is where all the SQL files get stored in a MySQL instance. Okay, so we have these things set up, and everything is defined in the Docker Compose. So if we need to migrate, then the things that we need to worry about are these two directories, then obviously the Docker Compose, and then we need to make sure all of this is backed up before we down the old system and then try to rebuild on the new system. Ideally, I did not do this, but ideally you would build up the new system, confirm everything's working, and then tear down the old system. I was re-leveraging hard drives, so I did it a little bit more a risk-prone way. Also because it's just a home server, it's not production, so we could be a little bit less careful, but still make sure that you do due diligence on getting all the backups. One thing which is different, and you'll notice, is we're specifying a version of Nextcloud in this image call, and that's important. So Nextcloud itself, if you pull down, say, like the latest container version of Nextcloud, it doesn't, it's not always compatible with the data that's actually there. So that's something to watch out for. So if you're pulling down the container or whatever the latest is, if you don't specify in your Docker Compose file, then you'll just always get the latest Docker image. So that is something to pay attention to, and one reason why you need to check the Nextcloud version. So let's clear this. Oops. And we'll just go through the steps of like what you need to do. So first, we're going to check the running containers. So we have these two containers. We have Nextcloud and then Nextcloud DB. Now I mentioned you want to do a MySQL dump. We don't have MySQL dump on this computer because the MySQL dump command is inside the container. So first thing to do is go into the container. So we can do sudo docker exec. We want a terminal, an interactive terminal, so -it, and then Nextcloud DB. And then what shell we want, we're going to use bash. Okay, now here we are inside the container itself. We want to go to the var lib MySQL. Now to run MySQL dump, you don't need to be in var lib MySQL to run it. This is useful because this directory that we have here, we already saw that this is mounted to the host. So if we run the MySQL dump in this directory, the host will then see it, and then we're able to pull that file from the host and put it like whatever backup that we want. So running it in this location, because of the way the volume command was set in the Docker Compose, is very useful. So we can just run MySQL dump, user is root, we're going to prompt for password, and we're going to use the database Nextcloud, and then we're going to output it into, we'll think of something unoriginal here, and then maybe what I'm going to do is like type the date. So we're just going to type 10/26 or whatever. And this is a .SQL file. Now again, the reason you're doing this is not to say that you'll definitely lose the data if you just like copy over everything from this folder. But there's the potential that that could happen because again, things from the database could be running a bit in memory. So you might not get everything if you just copy over the files, or the files may be partially written to or half written to the database files, that is. So this is always a good safety net. So it's like essentially an extra level of assurance. So assuming I typed all this correctly, it's going to prompt for the database password. And then we'll ls that, and we'll make sure that we got our backup. So indeed we do. So here we have the backup that we just created. And then what you'll see is if we exit from the container itself, we can cd into data db versus where the db data. And at this point, we can also then go and access the MySQL. So the way I did the migration was I actually copied everything over to the new host to make sure I had everything. But then what you need to do is rely on these MySQL backups. If you ever need to do a restore, you essentially can do a similar command. Like once you're with SQL, you basically just say database, and then you turn this arrow around. So you would run something like MySQL, and then the root, the user, and then you would say, okay, for this database, you're going to import all the data from, say, that backup. And that would essentially allow you to restore the data. Okay. Now, the second thing we need to do is go into data, and we're going to see what version of Nextcloud we're running. So you can see here in Nextcloud, the way they do the versions is not every version is always backwards compatible. So when you do restore a version of Nextcloud, one thing that you might need to do is make sure that you're using a similar enough version. So you can see, and they even have an array here which says like whether or not they can upgrade. So if they upgrade from say 20.01, 22.0, 22.4, 22.2, I think when I first did this, it came down with like a version like 23 or 24 when I did the migration, and then that was incompatible, so I had to rebuild the container again. The nice thing about all of this is because the data is kind of unaffected, then all the data is available. The other thing that I wanted to highlight about the Nextcloud restore is that what you really want is to save custom apps, any third-party apps, and this data folder right here. When you're rebuilding the Nextcloud, even if you like all the data is the same and the version is essentially the same, sometimes when it rebuilds, it can fail. But all of this stuff, like around, say, the config, the data, all of this stuff can be essentially nuked. And then Nextcloud itself, when it builds the container, it will auto-populate all this information back. So there was a couple of forums, and I had some like internal server errors when I first did the Nextcloud restore. And those internal server errors, it seems like it's pretty often reported that when you're restoring a Nextcloud instance, then like if there's incompatibilities or inconsistencies with like the versions of these files here versus the version of the image that you then download, even if it's a minor difference, it can still cause Nextcloud to sort of freak out a bit. So what you really need to do is here, this directory, with all of these files, external app data, all of these, like this Joe, Josh, Ale, admin, all of these are users. So you want to make sure that all of this information is present. But the other things about like core, config to an extent, console, remote, resources, themes, that kind of stuff will automatically get rebuilt. So unless you have anything critical in any one of those folders or something custom inside of those, you can just basically get rid of those, restore just with the data, the custom apps, third party, and the Nextcloud should be able to repair itself. It'll save all the files. All the files that are stored in Nextcloud are stored under the user accounts. So all of that would be in these directories for each user. And so long as you have both the database and then all the data files in this structure here, then you should be able to go forth and continue using Nextcloud. So, and we can see here, that everything is still working. So I had it set up, and we're able to log in and still have access to all of our files and photos and everything. Actually performs a lot faster. One of the things that I found was there had been like some corruption on one of the administrative databases, not the Nextcloud database, but one of the administrative databases in the MySQL, and that was just like really slowing down everything, and really was the reason why I had to migrate. So yeah, this is just a brief intro about like some of the steps and how to do some of the things before you go and restore the Nextcloud. Once everything is in place, again, the only thing you would need to do is then run the sudo docker compose up-d. I'm not going to run that now because this is already up and running. But if you were to run this, it would then go forth and rebuild the containers based on the data that you gave it. and you just need to make sure that the data in your DB volume and your Nextcloud data volume is, intact, or at least the key parts are intact. Once that's available, it should be good to go to install and get everything straightened out. So hope that was helpful. Sorry it wasn't a live run, but these kinds of restores, it's a little bit hard to capture. So I just wanted to put this out there and talk about a couple of things to pay attention to when migrating containers, specifically Nextcloud containers and Nextcloud instances. So hope this was helpful, and thank you very much.